In a few days, Louisiana Senator David Vitter and some of his Republican Senate colleagues will be going to Guantanamo. They say it is a fact-finding mission to Cuba about President Obama's decision to close the prison there. But even as the president's Republican critics head down there, we are learning new and disturbing information about how prisoners have been treated at Guantanamo and about how tribunals for those prisoners have been handled. Which means it's time for the Rachel Maddow Show special series on President Obama's cleanup mission, Scrub, Rinse, Repeat, because this is going to take a while. The former commander of the USS Cole has come out in opposition to President Obama's efforts to close Guantanamo. He says, quote, "We shouldn't make policy decisions based on human rights and legal advocacy groups." Basing policy decisions on human rights is a bad idea as a general prescription? More ominously, President Obama's effort to hit the pause button on the version of justice that's being practiced in those tribunals at Guantanamo has hit an unexpected roadblock. A military judge has rejected the White House's request to suspend a hearing for one prisoner who's the alleged mastermind of the bombing of the USS Cole. Finding out what has really taken place at Guantanamo has never been easy, but some of the most remarkable condemnation of the Guantanamo system has come from people very close to it. So far, at least 4 former prosecutors have resigned from the tribunal system there for ethical reasons, and it is their testimony that has lent a lot of the urgency to President Obama's cleanup mission. We are joined now by former Guantanamo prosecutor Army Colonel GitmoVandeveld. Colonel Vandeveld has served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. In addition to his time as a prosecutor at Guantanamo, he resigned from his appointment as a prosecutor there. This is his first American broadcast interview. Colonel Vandeveld, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
First, if you could just explain what your position was at Guantanamo, what it was your job to do.
Yes, I was a prosecutor who joined the commissions in May of 2007, intending to be there for 2 years. When I arrived in Guantanamo in May of 2007, I'd been on active duty for 4 of the preceding 6 years after 2001, serving in places, as you've mentioned, Bosnia, Africa, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
When you arrived at Guantanamo, I understand you were involved in 7 cases, prosecuting 7 different cases at the prison there. Were the circumstances in which those prisoners were being held, was the circumstances of the evidence against them not what you expected?
You know, not initially. Initially, I went down there with the idea that I was on a mission. And my mission was to convict as many terrorists as I possibly could and to put them in prison for as long as I possibly could. And if that included the death penalty, that included the death penalty. So I took my mission at face value and I accepted it uncritically. What I found after I got down there was that things were substantially different than what I had expected.
In what way were things different than what you had expected? Was it the circumstances in which people were held? Was it the status of the cases against them? What you knew about these prisoners?
Well, it was primarily the state of the evidence. At the time I arrived, Guantanamo had been open since 2002, essentially. One of the prisoners that I was assigned, or detainees that I was assigned to prosecute, Mohammed Jawad, had been in confinement in Guantanamo since early 2003. So I expected when I got there that the evidence against him would have been assembled into a file, or at least in some sense that I could assemble a case against him and prosecute it successfully.
But the evidence...
What I found instead was the evidence was spread out all over the place. It was, if you walked through the prosecutor's offices at the time I arrived, you would have found evidence hidden in, not hidden, but stacked in bookshelves, placed in plastic containers that were vaguely labeled. And so instead of having a neatly assembled package, which one would expect after 4 years, I had to go searching for the evidence.
Did it seem to you that on the prosecution side, things just, the people just didn't have their act together, that the tribunal system wasn't well organized, or did you come to believe that in the case of Mohammed Jawad or any of the other people that you were due to be prosecuting, that they actually shouldn't have been there in the first place, that they actually weren't guilty?
Well, initially I was assigned to evaluate several cases, several dozen cases, and it was clear that that many of them should not have been there in the first place. One of the cases that I can talk about was a case involving Haji Bismillah. Mr. Bismillah was somebody who was arrested or apprehended in Afghanistan in Helmand province, and he had actually been a protege of the governor of the province, Sher Mohammed. And when I received his case, it was in a binder. And to show you how ridiculous the whole process was, when I picked up the binder, I saw that his name was listed as Bismillah Haji. Haji, as anybody who's served in that part of the country knows, or world knows, is an honorific given to those who have made the pilgrimage to Mecca. So his name was not Bismillah Haji. If anything, he could be called Haji Bismillah, but obviously he had an Afghan first name. When I looked through the file, I realized there was no evidence against him. He had been arrested on the basis of some, what we called pocket litter, scant information, pieces of paper that had been found on his person when he was apprehended. I tried to track down this information, this pocket litter, and found that it had disappeared. So at that point, I wrote a memo to the convening authority saying, essentially, this person should be released. There's no reason for him to be here. And I'm happy to report that as of last week, Mr. Haji Bismillah is now back in Afghanistan. But it took that long for the system to figure out that he really should not have been apprehended in the first place. He certainly should not have been at Guantanamo, and it shouldn't have taken us that long to figure out that he should be sent back to Afghanistan. Other cases were almost exactly like that.
How did you get from those, the feeling about individual prisoners like that, advocating that they should be released, that the evidence against them wasn't strong enough to justify holding them? How did you get from there to deciding that you couldn't, in good conscience, be part of the system at all? Ultimately, you resigned.
Well, it was one case in particular involving a juvenile who had been arrested in December of 2002 and sent to Guantanamo, as I say, in February of 2003, Mohammed Jawad. He was accused of attacking 2 U.S. Special Forces soldiers who were in a marketplace in Kabul. And as I went through the file, I began to realize that there were significant pieces missing. And I've been a career prosecutor for 20 years. And things that you would normally expect to see in a file weren't there, so I went to find them. And as I searched for evidence, what I found was not evidence of his guilt, but evidence of his innocence. And I also discovered that he had been mistreated at Bagram Air Base, and certainly at Guantanamo. I didn't arrive at this conclusion by myself. I was assisted by the defense attorney in the case, who did a tremendous job. His name is Major David Fracht.
He's been a guest on your show.
He has appeared on your show. And
yeah.
Yes, he has. And he's a brilliant lawyer who took the time to educate me. And I have to say that I was as indoctrinated as anybody who served in the prosecution team. And he took the time to educate me and bring these facts to light along with me, and we were able to show jointly, in kind of a twist of the adversarial system, that Mohammed Jawad, if he was guilty in the first place, which is doubtful, certainly did not have sufficient proof to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Unfortunately, he still sits in Guantanamo today in virtual solitary confinement.
Do you feel that the system at Guantanamo is such that innocence isn't enough to set you free? That there isn't actually a way to get out of that system, even if there is exculpatory evidence, even if there isn't a strong enough case against you to legally that ought to legally bind you?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true, and that's what led to my conversion, if you will, from being a gung-ho prosecutor, you know, a true believer, into somebody who felt at the end truly deceived. Finding so many cases where it isn't, as you say, enough to be innocent. It isn't enough that there isn't enough evidence to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. You're almost guilty until proven innocent, and until you're actually charged, you don't have access to a lawyer, you don't have access to the evidence against you, and you really don't know why you're being held. And that's appalling after 6 years, going on 7, that Guantanamo has been open.
Former Guantanamo prosecutor, Army Colonel David Vandeveld, I know that this is the first time that you have spoken about this on American television. Thank you for choosing to do it here. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
We will be back in just a moment with Anna Marie Cox.